that is essentially Ferrari defrauding its highest value customers. In 2014, I was sitting at my desk at Lamborghini Atlanta, and out through the window I saw a tow truck driver that we used a lot drive by. And on his bed there was a LaFerrari. No one else in the showroom seemed to notice that he was pulling in, so I just wandered outside and walked up to him, and he gets out of his truck. He's like, "Look what I got!" And I'm like, "Yeah, what in the world? How did you get this thing?" He said, "Well, they just flew it in, and I got to drive it up to the dealership," because Ferrari of Atlanta was a little bit north of us. And I wasn't exactly sure why he had decided to bring it by for us to see, but of course the first thing I did was offer him $1,000 to let me drive it around the block. And he said, "Man, I would, but I tried it and I revved it all I could, but it's in some transport mode and there's some low limiter in it." I said, "Well, let me try." So he hands me the key and I jump in the car. It's still on his flatbed and start it up, and he's exactly right. It just pings off like a rev limiter at about 2,300 RPM because it was in transport mode. But the other thing that I noticed was that the car was filthy. And I was like, "This is really strange." I was like, "Was it wrapped or anything?" He said, "No, this is just how we pulled it off the pallet." With the vents full of rocks and things like that. It looked like they hadn't cleaned it up since it left Fiorano. I looked around the car and I saw the badge on the center console that said it was one of 499. And at the time I didn't realize they all had that exact same badge, and so I thought, wow, this must be number one. Surely it's a press car or some demonstrator or something that they're just circling around. But it turned out it was a customer car, and that badge became kind of interesting because it's always been kind of rumored or thought that Ferrari builds a lot more cars than they say they do. It's kind of like Jordan's 2-year vacation to go and play baseball rather than a 2-year suspension for gambling. I mean, everybody knows what really happened, but nobody really talks about it. And so there's always been these rumors about different cars or serial numbers that were duplicated or whatever the case may be. And so one of the things that we included when we rolled out the VINwiki app a couple of years ago was the ability for users to create lists of cars by VINs. And what people frequently use that for is creating registries of rare cars. But one of the early lists to kind of become prolific was a list of Enzo VINs. And since they're obviously all over the world, these can take a long time to compile. But as of today, there's over 490 Enzos on this list. Now, the factory claimed they made 399, plus one for the Pope to auction off for tsunami victims, plus a couple more for customers whose cars were totaled. So this is 25% or so overproduction of a car that is essentially Ferrari defrauding its highest value customers. Now, of course, they can't really stipulate any damages because today an Enzo is worth 4 or 5 times the original MSRP. And it kind of begs the question of how people become qualified to get these relationships with the manufacturers to buy and continue to buy all these cars, because certainly part of it is putting up with shenanigans like that. But I used to get asked this, particularly around 2014 and 15, because it's no secret that early in their life cycle, 918s and P1s did not sell well. They were begging for orders, but as the model progressed, they eventually sold out, and now they've become quite popular, and the market values are sometimes twice what MSRP was, and the LaFerrari market is about 3 times what the original MSRP was. So it seems desirable to be able to buy these cars, but it's always been a little bit mysterious as to how people come about the chance to buy them. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time today talking about what it actually takes to become a VIP with your favorite supercar manufacturer, because it's really not that hard. And the easiest way to remember it for me is an acronym called LOVE, L-O-V-E. L is for loyalty, O is for options, V is for volume, and E is for events. If you master those 4 things with respect to your manufacturer, you're going to get to buy whatever you want. And it doesn't take as much time or as much money as it seems. Now, when Ferrari was allocating Enzos, the allocation was based on the number of new cars you had purchased from Ferrari. But that evolved. With the LaFerrari, it was the complexion and the quality of your collection. And with the other manufacturers, obviously it varies. But what you've got to start with is loyalty. You need to be dedicated to a specific manufacturer and to a specific dealer. And so you need to sell all the sports cars other than the brand that you really want to focus on. Of course, if it's McLaren, keep a Mercedes, so if you actually have to get somewhere, you'll have something reliable to get you there. But regardless, make your sports car complexion made of cars from that manufacturer. As they look at allocating these cars, they want people who are going to be strong advocates for them. Now, that strong advocacy does not mean social media unless you're talking about Koenigsegg or Pagani. These traditional manufacturers don't like forums. They don't like people who get upset. They don't like people who air out public grievances. So never think that it's in your best interest, with respect to being able to buy more new expensive cars, to go out and be really public on the internet like this, talking about how things work or how you're upset. It doesn't do you any favors. Also, be cool. As you buy cars from these manufacturers, loyalty involves being okay when some things go wrong. These are handmade cars made by real people that can make mistakes. Now, it's okay if something comes in and they messed up an option, or there's a little bit of damage, or whatever the case may be, to bring it to their attention, but that does not mean that you make a big stink about it. At the end of the day, this is a mutual relationship where you're giving them business and they're giving you opportunities to buy cars at below market value. And you each need to recognize that this is kind of a relationship that goes both ways. And obviously, don't do anything that might hurt the manufacturer, like trying to lemon law a car, or joining some class action lawsuit, or saying bad things on an internet forum. All these things seriously hurt your chances of ever getting where you want to go. The next is options. Obviously, you've got to order a lot of cars to get to the status that allows you to buy these other more expensive cars. And so as you do that, the easiest way to get on a manufacturer's radar is to order the most ridiculously spec'd cars possible with as many options as you can. In most cases, the process of building a relationship with a manufacturer that allows you to buy a car that's essentially a third or a half of what it's really worth involves you losing about $1 million. And that doesn't mean you're just going to spend $1 million. That means that the cost of owning the cars as they depreciate and lose value is probably going to be about $1 million. Now, you could obviously, if you want a P1, just go pay $1 million over sticker and get one today. But if you want to be able to order one exactly to your spec and everything else you want involvement in the brand, then you're going to have to spend the money in a different way. But to start with, order the most undesirable car the manufacturer has and put all the options and more on it, whether it's through MSO or TaylorMade or ad personam with Lamborghini. When Ferrari's taking 10,000 orders a year, they're not going to know who goes with each one. But if you order $200,000 worth of options on a Portofino, they're going to pay attention. And so as you go out and you spec these cars, it's important that you do things that are unique and distinctive. And when you get the opportunity to go to the factory and do something like spec a TaylorMade order, or go to MSO and spec out your new McLaren, that will set you apart from the pack, particularly if you do things like pay 50 grand for a special color that's named after you. And if you order your cars in a consistent way, it starts to let the people on the assembly line notice, hey, that's that weird spec that guy from Georgia always orders. Options are all profit for manufacturers and sometimes for dealers. So everyone appreciates when you up the MSRP of your car by $100,000 or $200,000. The next is volume. You've got to buy some cars, especially with somebody like Porsche, where they're selling so many cars and they have so many desirable models. You pretty much have to buy all of them. And if they call you and say, I've gotten you a spot for this, you don't ever get to say no. They'll just go down the list to someone who says yes, and they kind of supersede you in the lineup. So you want your dealer to be advocating for you, and they have certain cars that they need to sell. If you wanted to get attention with Ferrari, you don't go in trying to buy a 488 Spider and an 812 Superfast. Go in there saying you want those, but also you want a GT4 Lusso, and you want a Portofino, and you want them all in tailor-made specs if possible. Spend all the money that you can, and I promise it'll get you on the radar so that you can order the cars you want in the future. But you may even want to buy some good pre-owned cars that the manufacturer will recognize due to CPO status, and the dealer will sort of use to advocate as part of your collection. And that can be a great way to kind of jump the line. I mean, certainly if you went out and bought a McLaren F1 today, sent it to the factory for an MSO refresh, it would immediately give you whatever status you want. You might even get a BP23 or a Speedtail, whatever they've called it. The last thing is events. All manufacturers host events every month of the year. They'll have racing schools and hospitality chalets at F1 events. They've got dealer events, rallies, all these things. And you're going to start to get invitations for these as you order new cars. Go to all of them. They're all very expensive and not a great value for money, but it's face time with the manufacturer and it's their ability to say that these events are successful. It doesn't matter how many customers Ferrari has. If they launch a new driving school in South America, they don't know how many people are actually going to come. Do it as much as you can, get to know them, and the quality of the events you get invited to over time will become better. The events also give you the opportunity to get exposure to the cars that the manufacturer still owns. For instance, when McLaren started to realize that the P1 was going to sell fairly well, they retained about 20 P1 chassis so that they could sort of refresh them, rebody them, repaint them. So for instance, as someone might come in to order a highly spec'd 650S or 675 LT, they might get presented with the opportunity to buy a P1. Now, it's not going to be at MSRP, it's going to be at whatever the market bears, and there's going to be an expectation that they spend more money on more options when that happens, but it ends up working out very well. I mean, let's look at a hypothetical. Let's say that you want to be a McLaren VIP customer today. It's fairly easy. Go to your dealer and say that you want a 720S Coupe, a 720S Spider, a 570S Spider, and a 600 LT. And order all the new cars in the same spec, personalized to you, with at least $100,000 or so in options. That will absolutely get their attention, and then ask them, say, look, I understand all the Sennas are allocated at this point, but I imagine you've got a press car somewhere. It looks like the market's 300, 400, 500,000 over sticker. Let me buy one for around that and then add my spec to it. So repaint it to match all my cars. And if you want to deliver them all at the New York International Auto Show or the US Grand Prix, or really anything you want to kind of showcase what MSO can do, I'm going to be paying for those options, and I'm happy for you to get some press for showing them all off. And I want to be at every event you do, every driving school, every race you attend, and I'm always going to be wearing a McLaren shirt. If you do that, you'll be paying about $1 million over what all those cars are worth, but all of a sudden, you're going to have all the cars you want. And when the time comes to order the P1 replacement, you're probably going to get it. So it's about that type of relationship building, that type of forethought in the ordering process. And at the end of the day, even if they build more cars than they say they will, or seem like they're taking advantage of you, or do a few things that rub you the wrong way, it is going to be a beneficial relationship for you. You're going to buy cars that are worth a lot more, and even though you can't sell them immediately, they'll have their rules and their procedures that do allow you to occasionally make really good money in the cars, and in the aggregate, it's a great thing. So if it's something that you really want to do, by all means go ahead, but just know it's not as hard as it always seems.